My husband, who was on an overseas assignment, was going to temporarily return home, and we decided to have a dinner party at the house where our son's family, who I live with, resides. We were having a pleasant conversation in a friendly atmosphere when our grandson, Daniel, suddenly changed the situation with a single remark.
Today isn't Grandma's punishment day, so you can eat, right?
Despite my best efforts to keep it together, I couldn't believe it was all ruined by a single word from my grandson. I was stunned and could only look down in silence. My son and his wife tried to cover it up in a panic, but the more they talked, the more Daniel revealed the truth. In her fluster, Kyla finally snapped. "Enough. Just be quiet for a bit." She yelled at Daniel, making him cry. Then,
"Don't just yell at a child."
Nelson's raised voice turned the dinner party atmosphere tense in an instant. Amid the silence of the living room, broken only by Daniel's sobbing, Nelson demanded an explanation from Caden. All the while, I was hugging Daniel, comforting him. In my arms, Daniel said,
"I'm sorry, Grandma. Will you get scolded again because of me?"
He was worried for me. What should I do now? I could only stay silent, holding Daniel tightly. I am Elizabeth Pratt, a housewife in my 60s. Nelson and I fell in love while working at the same company, so it was really tough until we decided to get married and I quit my job. In those days, without phones, it wasn't easy to exchange contact information, and there was a general attitude of keeping workplace romances secret. So, until we got engaged, I was always on edge, worried that my boss might find out. Even after our engagement, we struggled with seating arrangements and speeches for the wedding, to the point where I didn't know who the wedding was for anymore. Moreover, any slip-up could lead to Nelson, who stayed with the company, being subject to snide remarks later, so we couldn't afford to relax. However, thanks to those struggles, we are now bound by a strong bond. I realized this especially when Nelson's overseas assignment was decided, leading to us living apart. 3 months before his departure.
"I think I can come back within 3 years, but I'm worried. Why don't you come with me?"
I appreciate the thought, but at my age, moving overseas is too much. Unlike you, I can only speak English. Nelson was always worried about leaving me alone in America. Besides, if anything happens, Caden and his family are here, and we can always talk on the phone, so don't worry too much.
Yeah, you're right.
Caden is our only son. 14 years ago, when Caden started university, he moved out to live on his own. After graduation, he met Kyla in the cafeteria at his workplace, and they got married 7 years ago. 2 years after their marriage, our grandson Daniel was born. Caden, who rarely came home when he was single, started visiting regularly after Daniel was born. Both Nelson and I always look forward to seeing Caden's family. But beyond that, our time as a couple was very peaceful and enjoyable. Especially, Nelson planning trips for us during his long holidays made me happy.
I've been busy with work and left everything at home to you. From now on, let's spend more time together as a couple.
He would always take me to the places I wanted to go. For us, this was the first time Nelson had to live alone for work. Moreover, since it was overseas, returning home wouldn't be easy. It was understandable that Nelson was worried. However, if anything happened, Caden's family, living just 15 minutes away from the nearest bus stop, could help. So I always reassured Nelson that there was no need to worry. About a month and a half before Nelson's departure, I injured my back and had to go to the hospital. It was a mild case of a herniated disc, so I could manage going to the hospital and maintaining minimal daily activities on my own. However, to Nelson, who was about to leave, it was a major concern, and he said he would delay his departure until my back healed. I appreciate the thought, but it's not something that should delay your work.
But I can't leave you alone like this. What if something happens?
I tried to reassure him, but Nelson was adamant about not leaving me alone. Days passed with our discussions going nowhere. We're both adults, so don't worry about something like this. If anything happens, Caden and his family will help. As usual, I was trying to convince Nelson. Then, he had a flash of inspiration and said,
Caden. That's it. Let's ask if you can live with Caden.
Ha! Nelson immediately called Caden, and explained my back situation and his overseas assignment. After hearing the story, Caden said,
I understand. I'll talk to Kyla, so give me a moment.
He then hung up. I thought it was impossible for them to agree to such a sudden request to live together. However, Caden's answer was completely opposite to my expectations.
Kyla agrees too. It's only for about 3 years, right? That's no problem at all.
I see. That's a relief. We should thank Kyla soon. Caden, take care of your mom.
So, I ended up living with Caden's family, pushed by Nelson. Caden's wife, Kyla, worked as a chef in the same company cafeteria where she met Caden. A year ago, they opened their dream restaurant and both worked hard together. I'm sorry for asking you to take care of me when you're so busy with the new restaurant. A few days after deciding to live together, we had a dinner with Caden's family. While Nelson and Caden were chatting and drinking, I quietly apologized to Kyla. I thought it must be a burden for Kyla to take care of an injured mother-in-law for 3 years, especially at such an important time for her restaurant. However, Kyla said, "Don't worry about it. We help each other in times of need. Also, once you feel better, could you occasionally look after Daniel?" Kyla asked me. He's in daycare, but he's always alone from evening to night. Seeing Kyla's apologetic expression, I understood why she agreed to live together. She probably wanted me to look after Daniel. Of course. If there's anything else I can do, don't hesitate to ask. I replied with a smile, and Kyla also smiled, relieved. I was truly relieved that I wasn't just a burden. Living with Caden's family was more peaceful and comfortable than I had expected. Not only did they accept me willingly, but they also provided me with a room of my own since they had an unused one. Wanting to be of help to Caden's family, I started doing the laundry, washing dishes, and picking up Daniel from daycare. I also began cooking dinner in place of Kyla, who often worked late due to preparations for the next day. Caden and Kyla always expressed their gratitude, and I could spend all my time with my adorable grandson. Although this cohabitation started on Nelson's sudden whim, I was truly happy and spent each day grateful to my husband and son. However, this happy time did not last long. The trigger was an innocent comment Daniel made during dinner.
I like Grandma's food better than Mom's.
Oh dear, thank you. There was no way my simple home cooking could surpass a professional chef, but to Daniel, who had parents running a healthy restaurant, my American-style cooking might have seemed delicious. Additionally, Daniel proudly mentioned that he could eat vegetables he usually disliked if I cooked them. I praised Daniel, telling him he was amazing. To be honest, Daniel's likes and dislikes were very similar to Caden's when he was a child. So, I just made the dishes that Caden liked, and by coincidence, Daniel ate them too. However, this seemed to have struck a nerve with Kyla. If you like Grandma's cooking so much, why don't you have her cook for you every day from now on? Kyla's expression was calm, but her tone clearly indicated she was angry. Both Caden and I sensed that saying anything unnecessary would be unwise and continued eating in silence. However, 5-year-old Daniel didn't notice this and said,
Really? Yay. I get Grandma's food every day.
He was overjoyed. Seeing Daniel's reaction only made Kyla's mood worse. Since then, I started preparing all meals for Caden's family. Being a housewife, cooking was no burden at all. The problem was that Kyla's gaze became increasingly sharp as she watched Daniel and Caden enjoying my food. Moreover, Daniel began to call for me for everything. Bath time, reading stories, getting dressed, drawing, bedtime, no matter what it was, he called for me. I responded happily because I loved my grandson, but Kyla might have felt as if her child was being taken away. Elizabeth, please don't spoil Daniel. This is why old people are annoying. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll be careful. Before I knew it, Kyla's attitude towards me had become cold and filled with resentment. For months after my husband went overseas, Kyla came to me with a proposal. From today, in lieu of rent, you will do all the household chores. When I asked why she suddenly said this, Kyla explained that it was unfair to provide food and utilities for an additional adult for 3 years without compensation. She wanted me to repay this inconvenience through labor. Your back pain is healed, right? Then from now on, work properly. Her cold gaze and matter-of-fact tone left me speechless. Was this really the same Kyla I knew before living together? Though I was terrified by how much she had changed, I decided to comply silently. After all, she had a point. Expenses had increased with one more adult in the house. I understood her desire to offset this through chores. I resolved to be more considerate of Kyla and reduce her burden. By doing so, I hoped she would calm down and things would return to how they were. At that time, I genuinely believed that with effort, we could restore our good relationship. However, this hope was soon shattered. When I folded the laundry, I was scolded for doing it poorly. When I washed the dishes, I was berated for doing it badly. When Daniel showed affection towards me, I was accused of bribing him with food to win his favor. No matter how hard I tried to be considerate, it only seemed to provoke Kyla more. Still, I continued to handle household chores for the sake of my son and his family. The only solace I found was that Daniel and Caden enjoyed my cooking and finished their meals. However, even this soon became a problem. What's so great about this old-fashioned home cooking? It's bland, unattractive, and inedible. After saying this, Kyla would head to the kitchen, cook a meal for herself, and eat alone. The atmosphere at the dinner table was icy, as if we had seen a ghost. I was too scared to move, fearing what harsh words Kyla would say next. Daniel, sensing the tension, lost his appetite and left his meal unfinished. When dinner ended and I stood up to clear the dishes, Kyla called out in a cold, low voice. "Elizabeth, sit down for a moment." Dreading the reprimand, I sat back down and cautiously looked at Kyla's face, which was more hostile than ever. "I'm a professional. When I cook, it incurs a cost. Do you understand?" "Yes, I understand." I forced out a response. "Since you made me cook outside of work, you need to be punished." The word punished sent a chill down my spine. What more could she do when I was already feeling so broken? With my fingers growing cold and clammy with sweat, I waited for her words. Kyla twisted her mouth into a sneer and said, "No food for you tomorrow," before leaving the living room. I was momentarily stunned by the lack of insults or verbal abuse. Is this really all? I had never experienced such a light punishment, which made it all the more frightening. The next day, when I actually went without food, I quickly understood the severity of this punishment. Even when I felt faint with hunger, I wasn't allowed to rest from household chores. Moreover, I still had to prepare meals for Caden's family, my stomach constantly rumbling. Running errands became a battle against fainting from hunger. I began to think that enduring her insults at home was far better than this. Such punishment occurred 3 times a week. Caden, who could have been my only ally, was too busy appeasing Kyla to be of any help. In fact, he had recently started joining Kyla in berating and exploiting me. The only consolation I had was my grandson Daniel, but even that was restricted since Kyla would scold him if she saw him being kind to me. I had to limit my interactions with Daniel to the bare minimum. The room that was meant for me had turned into a storage space, leaving no place to stretch out and sleep. I had become less than a burden. I often thought of returning to my home to escape this treatment. But the thought of my husband worrying about me overseas kept me from acting on it. At most, it would be 3 years. If I could endure, everything would be fine. Living in constant fear of Kyla's anger, I continued my hollow existence. A little over a year after my husband went overseas, one day he called.
"Hi, Caden. It's sudden, but I'll be back next week for a short visit. How about we all go out for dinner?"
Next week? That's too sudden. How about we have dinner at our place instead?
"Sure, that sounds good. By the way, how's Mom? Every time I call, I'm told she's busy with Daniel, so we hardly talk."
Yeah, she's fine. We'll see you next week then.
Caden ended the call abruptly. At dinner, he shared the news with Kyla and me. Kyla looked visibly annoyed, but I was secretly overjoyed. Since my husband went overseas, he had only called a few times in the early months. I thought he was too busy to call, but I had been very lonely. On top of that, Kyla forbade me from calling him, so I could only wait for his calls. I worried about whether he had any injuries or illnesses, or if he was overworked. Next week, I could finally confirm these worries. I felt a surge of life returns to me. However, seeing my excitement, Kyla became furious. "What's with that happy face? Are you implying I'm the bad guy here?" "What?" No, I never said that. Shut up. Don't talk back. You're being punished again today. Confused and upset, I was denied food once again. For the week leading up to my husband's visit, on top of household chores, I was forced to help with the restaurant's preparations and distribute heavy flyers. Don't come back until you've handed out all the flyers. She would kick me out of the house. The treatment was harsher than ever, and I was on the verge of collapse daily. What had I done to anger her so much? Too tired and hungry to figure it out, I spent each day even more careful around Kyla. Finally, the day of the meal with my husband arrived. I prepared his favorite dishes and waited for him at the entrance.
Elizabeth. I missed you. You've lost weight and look pale.
That's not true. You look exhausted too. His sharp observation made me nervous. The past week had been so punishing that I was truly on the brink of collapse. But I tried to hide my poor condition so as not to worry him. Still, my husband's concern deepened as he continued questioning.
I've been calling regularly, but you never answer. Has something happened here?
What? Regularly? Since when?
Since I went overseas, I've called twice a month. I was always told you were busy with Daniel.
I had no idea he had been calling so frequently. As I stood there in shock, Kaden and Kyla emerged from the house. They greeted my husband with smiles and led him to the living room. Daniel, waiting there, excitedly ran to my husband, who was delighted to see his grandson after more than a year. This heartwarming scene made me momentarily forget our conversation at the entrance. Soon, Kyla announced the start of the meal. As everyone took their seats around the table, enjoying the cheerful atmosphere, I found myself standing alone a little distance away, out of habit. Noticing this, Kyra called out to me in a flustered tone. Elizabeth, what are you doing? Please sit down quickly. Startled, I hurried to sit down. My husband watched this scene with a curious expression. If I make another mistake, I might suffer more severe punishment later. With that thought in mind, I decided to focus on assisting my husband by serving food and drinks. Thanks to this, the meal continued peacefully without any further incidents. Just as I began to feel relieved, Daniel, my grandson, remembered something and spoke up.
Hey, Grandma doesn't have punishment today, right? It's good she can eat.
Daniel's cheerful smile caused Kyra and Kaden to turn pale, their hands and shoulders trembling, their eyes darting nervously. Anyone could see something was wrong, but they forced smiles and desperately tried to cover up Daniel's words. The more they talked, the more Daniel, oblivious to the situation, kept speaking the truth. Panicking, Kyra finally snapped. Just be quiet for a bit. She yelled, causing Daniel to burst into tears. Seeing this, my husband raised his voice in anger.
Don't shout at the child like that.
The pleasant meal instantly turned tense. In the now silent living room, only Daniel's crying could be heard. My husband, with a voice lower and heavier than I had ever heard, demanded an explanation from Kaden.
I spoke to Elizabeth earlier, and she said she didn't know about the bi-monthly calls. What's going on?
Well, that is. I mean.
Facing his father's stern demeanor for the first time, Kaden was visibly shaken. My husband's persistent questioning led Caden to confess everything about their treatment of me. Throughout this, I held and comforted Daniel. Despite fearing more scolding from Kyra later, I couldn't leave my sobbing grandson.
Sorry, Grandma. Will you get scolded because of me?
I gently stroked Daniel's head. Don't worry. Daniel, you did nothing wrong. I reassured him as best as I could. After about 10 minutes of questioning, my husband, overwhelmed with disappointment, buried his head in his hands. Discovering that his son and daughter-in-law had been mistreating his wife was hard to believe. Adding to his distress was the fact that he had proposed the cohabitation and had supported the restaurant's opening. The shock was immense.
I trusted you both, which is why I supported Elizabeth living with you and helped with the restaurant funds. What were you thinking?
After pondering for a while, my husband suggested ending the cohabitation. He also demanded the immediate return of all the living expenses he had sent during this period. Hearing this, I was shocked. What? Wait a minute. What living expenses?
You didn't know about that either.
Seeing me shake my head, my husband looked even more dejected and glared at Caden and Kyra. According to him, when the cohabitation was arranged, it was agreed that he would send $300 monthly for my living expenses. Caden was supposed to inform me about this arrangement later. But I had never heard anything about the remittance. Instead, I had been told to work to cover living costs and had been treated like a servant. Upon learning this, my husband, in a steady and grave voice, demanded Caden return all the money.
All of it. The restaurant funds and the living expenses. Return everything.
Hearing this, Caden and Kyra turned pale and began apologizing, even bowing down to my husband. Kyra explained that despite 2 years since opening, the restaurant had been struggling, which fueled their resentment toward me for living comfortably with Daniel. Caden admitted to keeping the remittance for themselves and preventing my husband's calls to hide their actions. Although they apologized and promised to change, my husband's anger did not abate. He took me back to my family home and, during his short stay, retrieved all the money he had given Caden and Kyra. Before his departure, he arranged for me to stay at a business hotel, ensuring my safety until he could return from overseas.
I'll arrange to come back to the US soon. The hotel staff will keep you safe until then.
Though I felt staying at home was enough, I agreed, not wanting to worry him further. Hotel life proved to be comfortable, and my health and spirits improved remarkably. In less than a month, my husband returned. The hotel bill was staggering, but he was relieved to see me looking healthier. I felt profoundly grateful to have such a caring husband. Back home, Caden and Kyra frequently visited, pleading for more financial support. However, the trust once broken could not be restored. Their restaurant, struggling even more, eventually closed within 2.5 years. Their dreams shattered, and their marriage fell apart. Kyra left, taking only her belongings, leaving Caden with their son, Daniel. Caden, now burdened with debt and child-rearing, turned his life around, finding a new job and working hard. To support him, I began caring for Daniel again. Though we provided no financial help, I took care of Daniel when Caden worked late. Daniel, soon to be a primary school student, proudly showed off his new backpack.
Look at this backpack. It's so cool with this gold part. Thank you, Grandpa and Grandma.
Watching Daniel, full of pride, always brought me joy. My husband and I look forward to supporting Daniel and hope Caden finds a kind and compassionate partner. How did you like this story? Please subscribe to our channel. See you in the next video.